to your project. It's called In, On, Above, and Through, because that's what you're going to be making forms do. So we're going to start with a sphere, so drawing our circle, and remember to turn the paper and always keep your wrist comfortable instead of trying to make your wrist and fingers move uncomfortably to make a perfect circle. And I'm going to be drawing this sphere on top of a rectangular prism. It gets a little bit smaller in the back because it's receding in space and bigger in the front. And then with your light source, you can do the shading that you've already learned. By the way, I have black paint on my hands. I'm not actually diseased, but you'll be doing your shading completely, and the cast shadow is what you're going to really want to pay attention to. In this case, my cast shadow is kind of going to fall off the edge of the form, and the rectangular prism doesn't have light hitting that far right side, so that's going to be the darkest side as far as shading on that particular form, and then the shading for the cast shadow of the sphere falls off. So you need to pay attention to how far does it go. If the light is further to the side, maybe that cast shadow actually goes onto the floor. Next is a form floating above another form. So I'm going to have my sphere with the light source directly above it, and then you have to put a little bit of space between your form that's floating and its cast shadow. So you'll see I have the space between the sphere and the kind of oval shadow, and then I'll do the shading for my rectangular prism. The next one is making forms like they're going through other forms, like I'm going to do with the cylindrical ring here. So the most important part about having one form go through another is what's called the implied line. That's the line that your eye sees, even though it's not actually drawn, that connects the two edges. So take, for example, this cylinder here. As it goes through, I kind of did a little dotted line there so you could see how the edges line up. And you draw your cylinder like you would any other time, or any other form that you want to go through something. Now those two don't have shading. I forgot to do those, but you would do shading on all your forms and cast shadows, of course. And then for the last one, this one is in, so forms sitting in other forms. Notice that I started by drawing it like a regular rectangular prism, and then I came and added in the lines to show the inside of the box as if it were a cardboard box that you could see into. And I'm going to have a sphere and a cylinder inside of here to show two different forms and two different cast shadows. So again, you're drawing your sphere and your cylinder like you normally would, and consider where your light source would be to do your shading. The only difference with the shading of the forms here is you have to consider, is the box blocking any of the light from hitting the actual form? And if so, you're going to have a cast shadow on the form in that place. It just so happens that I have my light hitting the side of the box that I can't see, and causing the inner side of my box to be in shadow. And it is going to have a cast shadow, so you need to pay attention to that. The far side of my box, the innermost side, gets a little bit of light, but not a whole lot, so I am going to shade it a medium value. And then the inside of the box is brightest. And then the far right outside of the box, again, is not catching any of the light, so it's in shadow. Now for the shading of the cast shadows, I'm going to add my oval for the sphere and my cylinder shadow, again that dark to light, darkest at the bottom of the form, and shade the actual forms themselves. Now what you'll see me do after I get the forms themselves shaded is I'm going to add a little bit of shadow past the edge of the box for the cylinder, since it's taller. In my mind, the shadow might go off the edge there, just to show you how that would be done. Again, kind of the same thing I was talking about with the sphere that's sitting on top of the rectangular prism, but I'll show you how you can make that work in just a minute here. Before we get to that though, we have to consider the cast shadow for the edges of the box, right? Because we know that the light is hitting the opposite side. So that left side of the box is going to cast a shadow. Be mindful if it's going to fall on your forms or not. And to the right of our box, we're going to have a cast shadow as well. So this is where I'm talking about your shadow for the cylinder might go past and go onto the floor. So keep in mind, depending on where your light source is, how far that shadow is going to travel, where it would fall. So here you have it. We've got your in, your on, your above, and your through. Those are the 4 elements you're going to include in your project. So what should you have in your project? Again, at least one form that goes in another form, on another form, above another form, and through. You need to have a consistent light source. So one light source for the entire image, it's all one scene, and all the shadows and all the shading needs to act consistent with that. You're also going to need to use one shading technique. The only one we've learned in class so far is blending. You're going to have implied line whenever you have forms that go through other forms. And I really want you to fill the page. This gives us a better composition, which I know we haven't talked about yet, but fill the page with all these different forms. There's an example of a finished one of these projects to the right, but you cannot use any of those elements in your own drawing. So you don't want it to look like this example piece at all. But on this one you can see it has in, on, above, and through, has a good consistent light source, the shading technique is all the same throughout the whole thing, and it's done pretty well. Maybe a few issues on some of the shadows, but other than that, a really great example. Start with a draft in your sketchbook or on some scratch paper to figure out how you want to lay out your elements and combine them in those ways, and then ask me for your final copy paper. Good luck!